I think it's that belief after 20 years in the industry or almost that fitness plays a critical role in public health and well-being. And I think most people who are in this industry think that way, right? And of course, the pandemic just highlighted that finally, right? But for us, and the reason why we do this now is because there is that disconnect between policymakers and how they perceive the industry. So that's why we go to Capitol Hill once or twice a year. That's why, HFA is now basically headquartered in DC, right? And so our goal is to bridge that gap.
This is All Things Fitness and Wellness, hosted by Chrissy Van. Together, we're uniting industry thought leaders and fitfluencers on the mission to inspire innovation and encourage people to live a life fit and well. Today on the podcast, I'm delighted to welcome Adam Zeitsiff. Adam's experience spans leadership at major fitness companies and pioneering digital transformations within the industry. In our discussion with Adam, he'll explore how digital technologies are reshaping fitness, enhancing accessibility and engagement. He'll also share insights on navigating challenges and leading effectively in the competitive fitness market. And additionally, Adam will emphasize the importance of advocacy, discussing how a strong voice can influence policy and shape public perception within the fitness community. Before we get to it, be sure to hit like and subscribe. We have new podcast episodes weekly featuring industry thought leaders and influencers. I'm your host, Chrissy Van, and this is ATFW. Adam, I am so pleased that we were able to connect because at time of airing, you and I are actually both on Capitol Hill, traveling in time if there's listeners here, but it's for a very good reason, spreading the benefits of what the health and fitness industry is all about. So first of all, I know it's busy times in the lead up, so thank you so much for making time today.
Of course, really excited to be here. Appreciate you having me.
I know that you're a tremendous advocate and also somebody that's had many evolutions in their career. So first of all, I'm curious to learn a little bit about why the fitness industry and where you started to niche into that space, because you have this very technological background and obviously managed to weave it right into this sector.
Yeah, it's interesting. I got into the fitness industry, I almost want to say by accident. I was a lifelong athlete in high school, played 3 sports, always worked out. And worked out in college and high school and afterwards, and then lost my way a little bit and put on some weight after I got married and found my way back to fitness and started working out again and really got healthy. And I was an entrepreneur in the technology space, as you alluded to, and I got into this industry really by accident. A couple of young gentlemen that worked for me for years, great kids. Well, kids, they both are married with children now, but they were kids at the time, and they worked for me and they left and started this little startup software business. And about a year later, had a few customers and came to me and said, hey, we'd love to scale this thing. And at the time, I was exiting one of my businesses, and I said, let's do it. So I joined with them, and it was a point of sale system in the sports facility rental where you go and play sports, play in leagues, have your kid's birthday party. And they had just started to pivot in the fitness industry for scheduling. And that company is called Easy Facility, which still exists today. It's part of the Jonas family. And I came on board as the president of the company and one of the partners, and we grew that business. And so I got into fitness sort of through an entrepreneurial venture on the more back-end point of sale technology side. That was late 2005, early 2006. So we're coming up on 2 decades now and been there ever since. And I've made that journey. It's weird, Chrissy, because I made the journey from the vendor side for many years, and then finally went over to the operator side of technology and then operations. So it's been quite the interesting perspective, and having that perspective on the vendor side really helped on the operator side. It was great.
Yeah, you're constantly able to make that bridge back and forth. But I want to peel that back a layer further, because if anyone's to look you up on LinkedIn, you have a stacked resume, and you say there you started out with this entrepreneurial venture. So where did this entrepreneurial seed get planted? Because it seems as though you kind of finished school and have had this very successful journey thereafter.
It's interesting. I got my first job out of college. 6 months later, started that business, which is where I met those 2 young gentlemen. Had it for 9 years, but it actually started with my grandfather. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. He came back from the Korean War, served our country, came back and started a business in lighting, manufacturing, refurb, design, and he had a great business. So you name the iconic institution in New England, and he built the lighting systems in the 60s, 70s, 80s for it. And I spent a lot of time in his shop, which was about 20 minutes from my parents' house in Massachusetts, and got to see how he grew a business, how he had a store, how he had customers all over the New England area, how he treated his people, how they treated him. And it gave me the bug. And I knew whether it was start a business or just run a business, I knew I wanted to do that. And he's the reason.
How incredible to have that inspiration from the get-go and really absorbing those lessons from such a young age, because you would have seen that it doesn't just happen easily. It takes a lot of hard work. And it's also constant pivoting, which really seems a theme for you. And I think it's a really smart way to learn so many different skill sets. So you've had many career leaps. So what was the inspiration behind doing that? And what was gained along the way when you have made these pivots?
Yeah, it's interesting. Some career pivots are intentional and some aren't. And I think for me, spending that first 10 or 12 years on the vendor side of fitness after my entrepreneurial time, we sold the company, Easy Facility. We sold it in 2009 to Jonas Software, who is a large vertical market software holding business in multiple verticals, but fitness and leisure is a big one for them. And we were the first one. So they bought our business. I was put in charge. I'd like to think, because I was qualified, probably by de facto standard, that we were the only one in the business that was in fitness and leisure.
We'll go with qualified.
Yeah, we'll go with that. It makes me feel good. But and we grew a great business there. We acquired a bunch of companies, and then one of the businesses we acquired had Gold's Gym as the customer, and got to know the ownership group, which is here in Dallas. Got to know the executives, and then when they were looking for a CIO. They came knocking and we started talking, and it just made sense to leap after 10 or 12 years on the vendor, kind of behind the scenes in fitness, to being out in the forefront, and being out in the forefront in the world's most iconic fitness brand. So that was a great leap, and I learned a lot more about, of course, operating clubs, even though I learned behind the scenes, but you don't learn until you're there. Even though I was focusing on technology, and learned a ton, and lost my mind for a minute, left the fitness industry for a little bit, went to Smoothie King as the CIO. And then when Gold's Gym was the opportunity to come back as the CEO, to be an innovator and a leader and grow the brand, that's just something you don't turn away. You don't turn it down. So and that was another pivot, right? In terms of just having an opportunistic pivot. And of course, we all know what happened in early 2020, and that changed the direction of a few things. And I think for me, I'm back now. I love being a CEO, but I really love being a CIO. I love having partnerships with all the other executives in the business, solving their problems, being able to see kind of beyond what's already built so that we can help them build new things. And so that's why I'm loving this role at LA Fitness, and really enjoy being part of that opportunity.
Let's talk about that lost your mind moment when you left the fitness industry. What was going on at that time? Because it is an industry that just feels like it pulls you in and is such a big community.
It is, and it was again opportunity, right? Opportunity. One of our SVPs of marketing at Gold's left, became the chief marketing officer at Smoothie King, and when they realized they needed a CIO, she said, "I have just the person." And so I met with the owner of the brand and all the leadership team, and it was just one of those moments where at that same time, Gold's Gym was up for sale the first time, and I said, "Okay, it's up for sale. I've been here almost 3 years. Love the brand, love fitness." Lost my mind and said, "Let's go to Smoothie King," which was a wonderful brand, by the way. Great people. I still stay in touch with their CEO and owner, and it's promotes a healthy and active lifestyle through very clean, no sugar added type of smoothies. And he did a great job cleaning up that brand. So to me, it made a lot of sense. You're promoting a healthy and active lifestyle. It's multi-unit technology operation. So that was the lost my mind moment. And if they hadn't called me to say, "Hey, come, would you like to look at this opportunity to be the CEO of Gold's Gym?" I probably would still be drinking free smoothies and enjoying my time at Smoothie King right now.
Yeah, blueberries, smoothies into the sunset, off you go. But it really does speak to the fact that every single time you've acquired more knowledge on the way. And I'm sure those leaps, nothing prepared you more for when you got into a situation that no one could have really prepared for. So you're at the helm then of Gold's. What were the biggest lessons that you learned in that insane challenge that got
Yeah.
thrown your way?
Yeah, I just got the shivers down my spine just thinking about it. But and listen,
Fair.
everybody in the fitness industry was affected. They all went through what I went through at Gold's, and we all just dealt with it in our own way. I think the difference for us and my team and I, because we were certainly a team before and during and after, was it was just an iconic brand with franchisees in 31 or 32 countries at the time, right? And so it was happening to our franchisees over in Asia Pac and coming this way through Europe before it even hit the US. So we got a bit of a head start as to what was happening, but it was for everybody, it was rough. I think for me, obviously like everyone, gym closures, financial stress. We ended up reorganizing through Chapter 11, ended up selling the business. I think the things I learned was, first of all, still exercise, because that was probably the one thing, minus a glass of wine or two, that got me through that, right? And that was one of those things, but it really, I was only exercising 3, maybe 4 days a week at that time, and now I've been doing 4 or 5 ever since, just because of the mental health benefits I felt. But I think a couple things. I think you had to prioritize people during that time. Back then it was for safety, but now that carries forward, even though we're post-COVID, right? We're out of the crisis, if you will, but prioritizing your people was a lesson I learned that carries with me every day. Their physical health, their mental health, the trust they have in me and the trust I have in them, and transparently communicating with them. That was something I took out of that. It helped during the process, but every day now, I kind of live and breathe that. The second thing was agility. Like, I think for me, nobody knew what the heck to do. Right? Nobody, whether the restaurant, fitness, whatever it was, nobody knew what to do. So being agile during that time was important. Being able to pivot quickly becomes a lifeline to whatever you're doing. And so I think for me now, I like to carry that being agile even more so in our day-to-day, not just in the technology world and following agile principles for creating things, but just in leading, right? And being a leader in that area. And I think at the end of the day, I think for me, it was a crisis, right? Like you said, it was a crisis. And I think for me, I learned crisis, it doesn't just reveal the weaknesses, which we had in fitness, but it also kind of, in our team and in a lot of fitness industry, kind of unveiled the hidden strengths we had as an industry. And it drove necessary change, not just for technology and different types of fitness, but for what we do to support our industry, hence the advocacy and all those things. So I think it led to all that happening, and it was good lessons, certainly.
Yeah, and we're going to be diving into that in a little bit in the conversation, but you're not wrong about the ripple effect. And I do really appreciate that you highlight on a personal note, keeping exercise as a pillar. It's one of the things I've enjoyed so much about my conversations, because everyone knows my former life was in the TV world, interviewed lots of people at executive level, and it's very rare to find people as aligned with what they do with decade-long careers and still live and breathe it. And I think that it just is a testament to everything that we know fitness is for people, and ultimately why we're amplifying the message. But before we dive into the advocacy side, at time of recording, it's also a bit of an anniversary for you that's rolling in from yet another big leap into LA Fitness. So when you reflect, how has the year been transitioning into this role?
It's been great. I mean, LA Fitness is a wonderful organization, wonderful people, a very large organization, and it's been fantastic to be welcomed here with open arms and to see what this ownership group has built over the last 40 years is pretty amazing. So it's been fantastic. We've got a wonderful office here in Dallas. We've got our headquarters in Irvine, and I really, really love being part of the brand and just seeing the growth that the brand has not only done over the last 40 years, but what it's continuing to do.
Well, and your brain is one that's constantly followed the digital transformation. And it feels like now more than ever, the changes are happening faster and faster. The more that we go, an exponent gets added. So, talk to me a little bit about the transformation of the digital space and fitness and where the trends are kind of leading us right now. Because I know even recently on LinkedIn, you've spoken to VR and what that might look like. You've spoken to obviously AI. We're all talking about it, but it being properly utilized. So, what's exciting you most as we look forward, and where should people really be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think, it's funny because every industry has their own transformation, and it's every X years it happens again from whatever the latest technology is. And I think basically, it's not just a trend, right, in any industry, but especially in fitness. It's been here. It's iterated over decades, and then now it will continue to iterate, and digitally transforming our industry will always be a part of the conversation. But I think for me, I think there's a couple areas. If we look at it, I think the technology allows for hyper personalization, which I think we hear a lot, but especially with some of the Gen Zs, and they really want something that is targeted to them and not just generic. And I think that idea of a generic workout fits all is definitely gone. And I think using data from wearables and smart gym equipment and analytics, I think we can certainly, as an industry, power AI-driven coaching, personalized workouts, nutrition guidance, things of that nature, based on the person's goals, their biometrics, how they're feeling, how stressful yesterday was, things of that nature, right? What kind of recovery mode they're in. So I love the hyper personalization that technology can bring. I think we've all heard the hybrid gym thing, and that was obviously big during COVID. And I think it will continue to be there. But my opinion is that the gym is certainly the focal point, and the hybrid piece is more as to cover when you can't get there. You go to the gym 3 days a week, you need to do something at home 1 day a week, that's great. The hybrid technical piece is going to be important for that, on demand for fitness, but also the community, which is a big part of fitness, as we all know. But I think it'll be secondary, but it will make the in-person even that much more valuable. And then, like you mentioned, the post about VR and the metaverse, and I'm not sold. I'm not sure I can put a helmet on and run around and sweat and not throw up or whatever, but I think you can't ignore it. I think it's going to drive maybe a different set of our potential customers into our gyms, which is great. But I think, and it's going to bring gamification, all those things that VR, AR type does. I still think there's a lot of work to do there. How do you make it mainstream, if ever? Or is it just a tool to drive people in that you can also offer in clubs that might keep them there, but it's not the reason why they go there, right? So I think that's important. And I think the last thing I think through, and I think we hear this in marketing, they call it omnichannel, and in wellness we call it kind of that whole holistic approach to well-being. But I think it's certainly happening with the tech too. Like the digital platforms and the tech platforms that are out there are going to move, and they already are moving way beyond just workouts into areas like stress management and sleep optimization and mental health, of course, and getting that whole kind of comprehensive well-being approach. So I think technology will help drive that. It won't be the only thing. The person, the people that deliver the support is going to be critical, but I think those 3 or 4 areas are going to be kind of the future with the digital transformation as it continues to evolve. And you notice I only said AI once. AI is going to be part of all these things. So I'm just weaving it in. AI is going to make hyper-personalization easier, make the VR and AR work better. The holistic piece, it's all going to be part and parcel to that.
Well, and you're right. It weaves into all the fabrics of every element of that. And slowly it's just weaved more and more into the everyday consumers' lives as well. It is rapidly evolving, and it's something, if you're not playing in the space yet, well,
Yeah.
you're way behind. And then I like that you highlight on the VR side. I actually had the chance to try a couple of the units at URSA, now Health and Fitness Association, and it is pretty mind-blowing when you do put the helmet on and
Yeah.
the realism that you experience, and you're eye to eye with the instructor on the other side. However, to your point on like what we saw with hybrid, we see the statistics don't lie. Nothing can beat the in-gym experience. And yes, coming from a biased standpoint, but not really, because we know that it bleeds into all the elements of life. Your physical health, which we know, chronic disease prevention, your mental health, which now more than ever, society needs that. I mean, you brought up Gen Z, and to that point, you look at everything that they have dealt with, 2 recessions plus COVID at some of the prime of their lives. They have looked at the mistakes that we have made in the generations ahead when you see the obesity crisis and the lack of focus on nutrition. And then our social health, which loneliness epidemic was declared by the U.S. Surgeon General this time last year. The repercussions are deadly. So on that note, you are a tremendous voice for advocacy, and one that has a lot of weight to it because you do have this wealth of industry experience. Why and when did you decide to really throw your voice behind this and get the momentum going?
Yeah, I mean, so I will be honest with you. I was one of those people who didn't understand the value of advocacy until March 20th, 2020. I just didn't understand it. I was in my bubble of just operating technology, whatever we were doing, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, like it hit everybody. And then we saw what happened. And so for me, I will give credit in I think it was April of 21 when Brent Darden was the interim CEO of then URSA. He started this group called the National Health and Fitness Alliance, which was going to help drive advocacy for the fitness industry, state and federal. It was a vision that he and the group had. He started it. He put my good friend Gail Landers in charge, and Gail has been a tremendous, not only for decades as an advocate in the industry, but he did a great job taking this from nothing and turning it into the NHFA. And he recruited a bunch of folks and said, hey, who wants to join? And it was a nice mixture of operators, some folks. I was at the time, I was in the technology side of fitness post Golds, and it was a bunch of people who came in, and some new, some who had never been advocates, and some like Rodney Stevens and Jim Worthington, who are some of the best advocates for the fitness industry they've ever had. Heck, they named an award after Advocacy Award after Jim, right? I mean, these guys are amazing. So they came in and they taught us. Gail was a great teacher. Rodney, Jim, you name it, they all taught us how to do it. Chris Crater, who is still the chairman, about to leave of the HFA, was helping to bring it all together. So that's when I got in, and I learned tremendously. They taught me, and they said, hey, it's not scary. It's pretty straightforward. They're just human beings like us. You're members of Congress, your senators, all these folks that work for them. They want to listen. That's their job. And so they not only taught us how to do it, but then they taught us the why, right? The why we need to do it. And, and it was the restaurant industry and the auto dealer industry were the two that we looked at and said they've been advocating for themselves for, the restaurant industry for 80, 90 years, auto dealers for 50 or 60. It's just a thing. It's just what you do. And that was the example we had. And that's really how we decided to build on that. So that's how I got in, and, no looking back now.
Yeah. And when it comes to what you're advocating for, because obviously we know the basis of this was essentially that the health club industry was not seen as essential. But it seems as though the momentum now has grown to represent so much more on behalf of the industry. So, as mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, you're on Capitol Hill technically today as people are listening. So, what is the goal to drive home when these meetings are taking place?
Yeah, and if we're on Capitol Hill right now, my feet already hurt, so I think we'll be fine. You and
A
I
lot
did
of
it
walking.
together last year, so it's a lot of walking. But for me, it started out with, like I said in that story, about why I got there. But why do I stay and give the time? And now with Gail's tutelage, now I chair the NHFA. But for me, it's that I think it's that belief after 20 years in the industry, or almost, that fitness plays a critical role in public health and well-being. And I think most people who are in this industry think that way, right? And of course, the pandemic just highlighted that finally, right? But for us, and the reason why we do this now is because there is that disconnect between policymakers and how they perceive the industry. So that's why we go to Capitol Hill once or twice a year. That's why, HFA is now basically headquartered in DC, right? And so our goal is to bridge that gap. And I think the things we talked about, Chrissy, are number one, we want the fitness industry to be recognized as a preventative healthcare partner, right? We want to change that narrative from we're luxury or we're recreation to basically promoting ourselves as essential preventive medicine. I think that's the key thing, right? So we're bringing data on reduced healthcare costs and how fitness and proper nutrition can improve chronic disease management and things of that nature, and enhance mental health, which has obviously resonated, like you said, since COVID. So that's the first thing we want to get across. The second thing is really, we want to promote policy support for accessibility, right? Advocate for policies that remove barriers to fitness, right? Like tax breaks for gym memberships, or being able to have it covered under your HSA or FSA with the FIT Act, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Insurance coverage for fitness programs. These are things we want to lobby for and get people to realize we've got to bring down the barriers that make it hard for people to participate in fitness. And then, a collaborative ecosystem. We talk to lawmakers about, collaborating with them, collaborating with healthcare providers and insurance, so that we can build these kind of innovative models together that focus on results, so we get to prevent things instead of how do we treat things, right? And so I think that those are the key things we talk about when we're there with them. And I think, these, as I'm sure, I know, but these folks, help us. If we want to scale the impact of business, they're going to help us secure funding and resources, or secure things like the FIT Act, which will allow people to use pre-tax dollars to pay for gym memberships. And then just focus on legislation. There's legislation that comes up every day on a state by state and sometimes federal level that is detrimental to the fitness industry, right? And so, people like Mike and the team at HFA are always focused on that. He and Charles focus every day on what's going to be good, what's bad for the industry, and how do we make lawmakers understand that we can be part of the solution. We're not just a problem. So that's what we do. And lastly, our profile. Most people, when we first went on the Hill, had no idea there was an association for the fitness industry, right? And so our job is to create that profile. And in fact, that's what the HFA is there to help do. I always tell our board, our job is to be advocates of the advocates. Our job is to not only lobby the lawmakers, but to let the world know what our association is doing for us. That's half the battle. There's pre-pandemic 30,000 gyms, now 20 something, but there's only a few thousand members of the HFA. There's so many gyms out there that should be members that need to know what they do for us.
Yeah, you speak to exactly what my next point was going to be, that the ripple effect is happening. And obviously, I know everyone that goes and has been involved is doing everything they can within their networks to ripple down and educate people on the fact that they too can get involved. And I like as well that, and especially the name helps with the Change to Health and Fitness Association, because I think it
Mhm.
clearly states what they're all about. But it's about getting that global voice out there too, because obviously, I mean, I'm joining you from Vancouver, BC. We have our Fitness Industry Council of Canada,
Yeah.
very similar plight where we're trying to get a tax line 30399 changed over so that we can
Mhm.
claim physical activity as medical expenses. The funny part for us is the verbiage actually exists in the legislation. They just need to change it from ineligible to eligible. So riddle me that, because it would save them a boatload of money. But similarly as well, provincially, there are different
Mhm.
laws. Like, I know they worked to cast one down in our province of Saskatchewan, where basically people's memberships would have been taxed, which is not good if we want to get more people moving. This physical
That's right.
inactivity crisis is a global problem
It's a global problem. Yep.
that causes very real ripple effect issues that we are seeing play out live action in society. So the fact is, people do need to get their voice behind it and they do need to get involved. So you are all really the role models, so to speak, in the industry now. If there is somebody listening that is that gym owner of one club, because you know as well as I do, Adam, that a lot of them may have the perception, I'm busy. I'm tired. I'm busy. I'm trying to run my business. I'm trying to run my business 4 hours or 4 years after my business got completely shaken up. I don't have time for this. So what would be your message to those that maybe have that mindset, and maybe explain to them why a perception shift might be worthwhile?
Yeah, I think, what if you don't? Like, that's the first. What if you don't do it? What if everyone says we're not going to do it? Where's your business going to be? And I knock wood. We all do. Hope we never have a global pandemic like that, where the world shuts down and we are everyone has learned a ton from the medical community to the government. But it's not just that. It's all these other things. I mean, there are acts out there that, for example, that thankfully the HFA was able to overturn and get them to take us out of it. But that would make it impossible for you to have your member sign a liability waiver. So if they stub their toe in the gym, even though they're grown men or women, you would be liable. And so I would say, you need to be involved, because what you don't know that is happening behind the scenes that could really scare the what out of you, right? And I think that's really critical. So if you're a gym owner, if you've got a one mom and pop shop, you've got 3 or 4 locations, you've got 20. We have some large brands who have 20, 30 locations who haven't joined yet. This is your association. This is the group that's going to help you. You need to not only join, but you need to advocate. And by the way, advocating with your local member of Congress, which is going to be in your district, is not hard. They're very friendly. They have to legally, they have to engage with you, right? They can't say no. Now they might not meet with you for a long time. You might not meet with them, but you might meet with an assistant legislative director, an assistant chief, but you'll get their attention. They'll recognize you. And by the way, it does not take a lot for you to get on their radar, right? For example, you got a business and every dollar counts. I understand that. But if you wrote a check once a year for $500 to your local congressman or woman and went to their dinner or a fundraiser, you're on the radar. You are a donor. They will return your calls. Even if it's a staffer, they will come by. I've had many, and our Congresswoman Beth Van Dyne has come by a couple of our gyms, right? And even though she's already signed on for the FitAC, and we're so happy for that, we're still going to grab coffee today while we're walking around DC, because she's such a proponent of making people healthy, right? And so, but you as a gym owner would never know that if you just don't, if you didn't take the time. So it will benefit your business, and you will get more business out of it, because you will be more visual in the community because of your relationship with your local member of the Congress.
Well, and it's elected official for a reason.
That's right.
So they do work for you. And I think it is
They do.
important to remind people. And again, wherever you're joining us from globally, that's the same case. And generally, we seem to be fighting the same issues. So I think the more and more we amplify and even get together from a global perspective, these may end up finally getting over the fence, because I'll have you explain, and I know I've talked about it on the podcast many times, but maybe first just tell people, what is the FIT Act? Because I know that's
Sure.
something that's going to be spoken about over and over again on Capitol Hill today. I'm using air quotes, even though you can't see them.
Yes. No. I think for me, I think it's pretty simple. It's a change to existing tax law that allows pre-tax dollars from their HSA or their FSA to pay for physical activity, fitness, both for adults and kids, right? So if you think about it, it's gym memberships, it's sports leagues, whether it's for you folks, it's hockey, for us, it's baseball, football, whatever. It's equipment. It's not, going to buy a new driver. Like, there's a limit on the amount of equipment. But if you sign your kid up for hockey or baseball, and they need a new stick and a new glove for baseball and some cleats, that's under the threshold most likely. And that counts. Your gym membership up to $1,000 per year or $2,000 per family can be allocated to this based on the proposal for the FinAct. So it's great, and people, more and more people in the U.S. have HSAs and FSAs now, especially with the Affordable Care Act making it even more available. And so I think it's not just for those who make ridiculous dollars, work in white collar. It's for anybody, right? And so I think that's really important. So we're trying to get the government to understand that it's a fairly low cost bill as they rate them. Yes, there's some tax dollars they'll lose, but at the end of the day, we're not asking them to write big checks. Change the tax code, make this work.
Yeah, and when it talks to dollars, I don't have the exact figure in front of me today, but I know it saves billions in healthcare if we get more people moving. And then from the industry side, where you talk about the fact that you are donating your time to put your voices out there. But if this were to get passed one day, it also would equate to substantial revenue for health clubs and gym operators as well, which is not a bad thing because this is an industry that is helping people live healthier lives. So I'm curious because I've been out there with you and I generally see most conversations go quite well and things well received in the halls of Capitol Hill. But I know that there's been advocacy for this bill for quite some time. So what are generally the roadblocks that are met sometimes in these conversations for the ones that say, I'm not sure if we are going to support this?
It's funny. It's a bipartisan bill. It was brought to the House as a bipartisan bill. And I think the only really things I've seen are, number one, people who feel that HSAs and FSAs are just for the rich. And they're not, through the Affordable Care Act. Now they're available for over 100 million Americans. I don't know the exact number. It's roughly a third of the population. And I think the only other thing I've seen really is there was one member of Congress who just didn't like HSA and FSAs, period, and they just didn't want to hear it. So we've had very little pushback. I think what we're missing, Chrissy, is they just don't know. We are a large industry, but to them, we're not. We're not as big as restaurant. We're not as big as oil and gas. We're not as big as retail. Some of these industries are so big, they're on their radar all the time. Liz, Jeff, Mike, their whole team, they're changing that now, and we're on their radar, but that's where this work comes in. It's not that they don't like it. They just don't realize what it was meant for and why it'll help their constituents. And once they do, they're signing up.
Yeah, there's a lot of nodding heads that happen. And to your point, exactly, it's just not on the radar for a lot of them a lot of the time. But I think every time that you're all sitting in that room and also able to share perspectives from your different markets and experiences and how it's helped communities. And we know healthier, happier communities generally economically contribute more as well. So again, the wins are just nonstop. It becomes really hard to argue with. But the point is that people have to have their voices heard, and there's a lot of noise out there. So it is going to take a lot to make sure that we rise above the chatter. For yourself, as I say, over 2 decades in the fitness industry and just this incredible entrepreneurial journey to get there. With so many leaps, what excites you the most as you look ahead for your future in the fitness industry? Because obviously it's one you're passionate about.
Yeah, it is. I'm passionate about it. I love it. I think a couple things. I think I am excited to really see how people leverage technology to improve what they're doing in the gym. Right now, most of us have smart devices. I'm a MyZone freak. I wear it all the time. Or now I have it on my watch. All those things are great. But I think I am excited, number one, about how the technology will change how people work out, how it improves, what they're focused on. I think that's really exciting for the next 4 or 5 years. The second thing for me, I think, is our kids. Like, I am really worried that what the forecast says by 2030, 40-something% of the U.S. population will be, from a child perspective, will be obese from adolescence. And they categorize obese as in the 95th percentile or higher. That's a lot. And so I worry about that. But for me, I think that's the opportunity for the fitness industry. There are some cool brands out there like KidStrong, who's out there, who based here coincidentally in Texas, who are growing like crazy for age appropriate, starting when they walk until they're 10 or 11 or 12 for fitness. And it's real classes. And my daughter does it. She loves it. She's 4.5. She sweats her butt off. Has agility now. She's doing, balancing. I mean, all ground-based, appropriate stuff. But man, it's great. And so I think, that's the kind of stuff I'm excited for, because we have to get ahead of that. Our industry is uniquely poised, in my opinion, to solve that. But I don't care what the brand is. It could be big brands, little brands, doesn't matter. That we have to focus on that. So I think, and that will in turn hopefully bring parents into the gym too. So I'm excited for that piece as well. And so there's a lot of other things in that area, but I think how technology helps people stay in the gym and what we can do for our kids and how we can grow. And then lastly, and it's a one that is a personal opinion only of mine, but I do think, there's a there with the combination of the GLP type products and fitness. And when done correctly and monitored and not abused, there's something there. And I think, again, my own personal opinion, not my employer, but I'm just saying I do feel that there's something there. And I think if it's done right, I think we can change a lot more lives and make sure they do it in a healthy way.
Yeah, I agree with you. And same from personal opinion. It definitely is the biggest gateway for a lot of people that we've
Yeah.
seen in a very long time. And we know when done right, and obviously around the appropriate guidance, it is effective. It's really interesting to see some of the different companies that are biting into that space. And it's just
Mhm.
going to be something that's rapidly evolving over time. But at the end of the day, especially when it comes to the obesity crisis, this is a huge, exciting shift. So, one to watch for sure. I do like to leave people on a little inspirational nugget, because who doesn't want that for their day? So, when you reflect on your journey, what's
Yeah.
the best piece of advice that you've taken with you along the way, or a little nugget of wisdom you can impart on us?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. When I first started my first business, I was 22. I was the young guy. I actually had to grow a beard just so I looked older. Now I keep a little one once in a while, and I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't because I look older. And but I think some of the things I've learned, and I mean, I tell you, you make more mistakes than you do successes, but you do learn from them. But I think a couple things that I learned. I learned this when I first got to Jonas after they bought our company. I think definitely, I would say, make sure you understand from a business acumen perspective. Like, don't just stick in your wheelhouse. If you're a marketing person in fitness, make sure you understand the other sides of the business. If you're an ops in fitness or you're a trainer, understand the marketing side, the sales side. Make sure you certainly know how to deal with P&Ls and understand what that means. And many of us never have to deal with that, but you need to know that, because that's what makes business turn, and that makes you gives you a much better foundation. And then I think two other things really: continuous learning. I'm a technology guy. I'm a CIO. I just took a UC Berkeley Haas School of Business, 3-month executive education class on AI, even though I'm living in it every day, but it was super helpful for me and I learned a ton, right? So I think that is something that probably 20 years ago, I would say, I don't need to do that. But now it was money well spent. And not only did I learn a ton, it cleared my thinking on it even more. So I made a ton of connections with it, et cetera. And the last thing ties to that is a network. I tell my kids, my older kids, I have a 23 and 22-year-old. It's not who you know, it's who you know. Like, you have to get to know people and network. And especially in fitness, our industry thrives on connection, community. So I would encourage people, from what I learned, is to just make the connections, find the right mentors, potential partners, colleagues, whatever it may be. Like, find them and reach out to them. And for me, like, people, like, I love when people, and it happens a lot, and to my colleagues in the industry too, who've been around for a while. Like, I get hit up a lot on LinkedIn. Hey, I had this question. I wanted to run this by you. No one trying to sell anything, just reaching out for advice. And I think that's great, but that's brave. You've got to be brave to do that. And I would encourage people, be brave. No one. And I always answer yes, even if I wound up not being able to help them. I can find someone who can. I always say yes. So as long as you're not trying to sell me something, I always talk to people. And I think it's great. I learned something from it, and I walk away feeling great. And so I would encourage people, don't be afraid to do that. Hit them up. Don't shy away from it. And not only will it help you, but it'll help someone else, right? And lastly, we've said it, but make sure you find your advocacy voice. I don't care what industry you're in. Obviously, we're here at fitness, but find your voice. It's not just going to help your business. It's certainly going to help you, and it'll show you that you can make a real difference as well.
Great advice. And I do have to say, there's an unfair advantage when it comes to networking in the fitness industry. And I have a theory that people are so kind and friendly because they are ones that practice what they preach, which means they're doing their exercise, which means they get their better sleep, boosted
That's right.
mental health, feel good endorphins. So I'm pretty sure that's why everyone is so kind in the hallways.
Yeah,
Adam, I so appreciate your time today.
thank
Thank
you.
you for the work you're doing on behalf of the industry. And I really appreciate you taking the time and space to educate those and perhaps motivate others that have thought about dipping their toe, haven't quite made the leap, because I'm sure the info you provided sets the blueprint for them to do just that.
I appreciate it, Chris. It was great to be here. Thank you.
You've just listened to the All Things Fitness and Wellness podcast, hosted by Chrissy Van. This episode was brought to you by Fitness World, your fitness, your way. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. We have new podcast episodes weekly featuring industry insiders and influencers. Together, we're on a mission for everyone to live a life fit and well.